Right, Ed, thanks ever so much for agreeing to see us.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Thank you, really appreciate it. Tell us about yourself, Ed. I mean, for example, what kind of child were you? Could you describe your upbringing to us?
Precocious, intelligent, charming, good looking. Yes, that's it really. No. Yeah, in the 1960s my mum was the organiser, if you like, of the Small Faces fan club. Which kind of gave me a background into it wasn't why I became a mod or anything like that, but that's the kind of home that we lived in. My dad was a bookmaker in the East End of London, and yeah, so I just grew up in a normal kind of house in a normal suburb of London, and on the east side of London, and yeah, it was a normal childhood, I think.
Yeah. I mean, your mum running the Small Faces fan club, that was obviously for most people that's a big deal. Do you, retrospectively looking back, realise that now?
Yeah.
Was that important to you, do you think?
It was a bit of luck for me, because it certainly helped me in getting to know, about mod culture and things like that. It was obviously quite important. As I said before, it wasn't the reason I became a mod. That was mainly down to the jam. But once I had become a mod, I think it was easy to tap into my mother for, memories. For example, she gave me a copy of Stevie Marriott's Garnet Mims album that he gave her in 1967, which at the time the mod scene was very much into kind of punk rock sounds, and soul hadn't really happened, and my mum said, well, if you're a mod you might as well check some of these records out, and gave me records that Steve Marriott had given her. And another Small Faces thing that I remember growing up was the two stuffed alligators that my mum had in the front room by the fireplace ever since 1967, which the Small Faces used in a number of photo shoots on leads, as if they were real alligators. We only threw them out in about 1977, and then when I saw the Small Faces photo many years later, I realised that my mum had probably just cost me a couple of grand. But anyway, Steve Marriott bought me an air rifle when I was a kid, and I have memories right up until the late 1970s of Kenny Jones coming around to see my mum in his white Corniche, oat-coloured Corniche convertible, or a Series 3 Bentley Continental, one of the two. Anyway, my neighbours hadn't really seen anything like that before, and it literally was kids in the street coming out and looking at the pop star who'd come to see my mum. So that was all a bit weird, but that wasn't really why I got into being a mod. That came later, when I'd grown up. Okay. If you can call 15 grown up. Yeah.
And so in terms of when you were approaching 15, what bands shaped the young Eddie Pillar? What bands sort of came into your consciousness?
Quite easy to answer. I was a massive fan of Bob Dylan, and I went to see Bob Dylan in June 1978 with some boys from school at Earl's Court, and this made me realise that gigs were fun. So after that, I used to buy Sounds every week, the music paper, and read it religiously. And then after that, my kind of taste changed, and it happened I remember it very specifically. I had chicken pox. I was at home. My mother had a friend who still worked in the music industry, worked at EMI Records. She brought home some records. Now they were Queen, Elton John, all that kind of stuff. And then in the bottom was this little 7-inch single by a band called The Saints from Australia, who were probably the first punk band, even possibly before the Ramones, certainly around the same time. And it was a single called I'm Stranded, and it just blew me away. And from that point on, I got into the kind of the punk thing. That was in probably early 78, I'd say, around the time I saw Bob Dylan, which I thought was a bit hippie, but still really good because I liked him. And then, of course, from the Saints, I went to see everybody I could, until eventually I stumbled across two bands in 78 that I saw that changed everything, and they were the Buzzcocks and the Jam. And at the time I thought both of them were mod bands, the Buzzcocks specifically because of their artwork and their image and their music, very angular, very modernist in the traditional sense rather than the retrospective sense that I think the Jam were a bit more retrospective. But as soon as I saw the Jam at the Music Machine, it just blew me away, and that was it. I was hooked. I bought a Parker, and then You're in East London now. And then, yeah, I just started going out every weekend. I had a Saturday job, I had holiday jobs, and I spent all my money on records.
Yeah.
That was it.
And the Young Eddie Pillar then created fanzine, Extraordinary Sensations.
That's it.
Was that about 1980 or something?
That was 1980, and I'll tell you why I started it. I started it because a lot of the classic mod fanzines, the first generation mod fanzines like Maximum Speed, Shake, Direction, Reaction, Creation, they were stopping because the older guys that were in it from the beginning of 78 were kind of getting a bit bored, and they were kind of leaving. They weren't leaving the scene. People like Grant Fleming and Gofford Gladding were still around, but they kind of couldn't be bothered to do the fanzines anymore. So there was a whole new generation, second generation of fanzine editors, people like me, Ray Patriotic, XL5, I mean dozens of fanzines. You know how important fanzines were to the mod scene. And Extraordinary Sensation, I was just lucky because I took it quite seriously. It got really famous and quite successful.
Did you do it yourself in terms of the practical
Yeah, I did all of it.
stapling,
Yeah, all of it.
printing and all kinds of things?
Well, I didn't do the printing. I did the printing in the first 3 or 4. And then after we started selling, I think probably from number 5 we started doing 1,000, and then by number 10 we were doing about 5,000 or 6,000, and it was 40 pages, double-sided, so it's a hell of a lot of printing. So I had a friend from Epping, who was another mod, who works as an apprentice printer. So of course he would stay late at work and just print my fanzine for me. I'm sure he did quite well out of it as well. And it was funny because at the time, the pre-internet days, the mod scene, if you like, in 1980 and 81 had grown out of fanzines. So there was a massive network. In each town you had a fanzine. Derby, Huddersfield, wherever you were, there was a local mod fanzine. Mainly with jam-inspired names as well, I must say. But these fanzine editors had a network, you know, like, so I would send 25 copies of my fanzine to Derek Shepherd from in the crowd in Guernsey. He'd sell them, and then he'd sell some. So we had this massive network, not just in the UK, you know, in Germany, Sweden, Spain and Italy. In fact, some of my earliest DJing gigs were out of the country. You know, I was booked to DJ in Germany in 1980 and Italy in 1981, and so that's why I became a DJ, because the fanzine network that mod had thrown up, because the newspapers never wrote about mod unless it was disparaging, or it was the Sun writing Anita Dobson from EastEnders wearing a parka, you know, on a bank holiday. It was a bit of a joke. So the fanzine was really good, and from there my whole kind of interest in working in the music industry came, and I left my job in late 1982 to do the fanzine full time, and off the back of that I set up my first record label called Well Suspect. So that's basically how it started. I did a record stall in Kensington Market all around the same time. They were all kind of mod related jobs, fundamentally self-employed, aspirational, trying to get something going, you know. Got a lot of stick for it as well from certain quarters, but then other people appreciate it. So.
Yeah, sure. So you and Giles Peterson
Yeah.
launched Acid Jazz then in 88?
87.
Okay.
The first record came out in 1988, but we actually conceived the idea and recorded the Galliano. In fact, the first Acid Jazz record wasn't even on Acid Jazz. It was on Polydor, where I actually had a job as a consultant on a Polydor offshoot called Urban Records. And they'd already signed. I signed the James Taylor Quartet to them in '87, and the boss there said, "What else you got?" So I said, "Well, we got this kind of plan, this kind of new sound that's coming out of the underground jazz clubs. Are you interested?" And they said, "Well, go on, try it. Make us a compilation." So it's called Acid Jazz and Other Illicit Grooves, and it came out in probably '88, but we made that in '87, and then. Off the back of that, in fact, me and Joe had already set up the label, but we hadn't released anything, and we thought that if we worked with Polydor, it would give us a head start, because indie labels are quite tough. So that's what happened, and the album came out, and I hasten to say it was a massive international success, and the label followed soon after.
Is there any connection between acid house and acid jazz in terms of the fact that the labels or the music scene is very similar, and that the year was roughly kind of the same? Is there any connection there?
Yeah, there's a massive connection between acid house and acid jazz. Acid jazz, okay, this is how it happened. There's a guy called Nicky Holloway who used to run this club in London called the Special Branch. Now the Special Branch, it was ironic because I got into the Special Branch because it was on Saturdays at the Royal Oak in Tooley Street, which was a famous mod club on Fridays. I think Tony Clark used to run it. We used to go down on a Friday night, and one day the bouncer said, you know, to be honest, I'd had enough of the mod scene by 85, 86. It was boring. And the bouncer said to me one day as I was moaning to him outside, you want to check it out tomorrow night? You might like it. And I went down there, saw Giles Peterson DJ for the first time. He blew me away, and he was DJing with a guy called Chris Banks in the jazz room. Now, the jazz room at the time was Jimmy Smith, Jimmy McGriff, Brian Auger, and loads of Latin stuff. So we've walked in, we were just in a Boogaloo at the time on the mod scene as well. We've walked into this club and it's like, this is a club for us, and there's loads of girls here, and you don't have to be an idiot to come. By that time, the mod scene was kind of not a cool place, you know. So we started going to this thing. Downstairs was a big electro b-boy kind of hip-hop room, pre-hip-hop hip-hop. And everyone went on a holiday. Nicky Holloway used to do these gigs at the Zoo, at Stret Maestering. It was really exciting and fun. They did big holidays, and on the holiday in Ibiza in 1987, all the DJs went, the soul DJs and the kind of go-go and electro DJs, people like Andy Weatherall, Judge Jules, Roy the Roach, Chris Bangs, Giles Peterson, Bob Jones, Johnny... just about every DJ on the London club scene went. But on this particular year, half of the guys stumbled into the sound of acid house in a club called Coup, and it was the first time it was played in Europe, really. They came back saying, we found the new thing, this is going to change everything. So we all went along to this club, everyone's taking E, and it was extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it. It was just amazing. We knew something really big was going to happen. Now, fast forward 6 months, and acid house that all these top DJs had discovered one night in Ibiza just had taken London by storm. Shum and various other, Spectrum, various other kind of, The Trip, various other clubs were happening, and we were all going. It was a fantastic time, you know. We were all starting to grow our hair a bit and get out of mod. And then after 6 months, we went, I don't really like the music. You know, it's all right. It was all right for the first 6 months, but it's boring. You know, there's only so many times you can go like that on acid and E. And but we loved the scene, we loved the vibe, we loved the people, because it was all the old soul scene had got into this new thing. So basically, DJs like Chris Bangs and Giles Peterson just said, look, let's keep the vibe, but play our own music. And to make our music fashionable, because the jazz scene was on its arse at the time, we just called it acid jazz. It was a joke. Hey guys, if that's acid house, this is acid jazz, because we're on one matey as well. And basically that's what happened. And it was a joke. We were supposed to release 2 records, you know, me and Giles, but suddenly it took off almost overnight. Galliano, A Man Called Adam, all the early bands took off, and suddenly we're sitting in the driving seat of a juggernaut that is smashing down boundaries. You know, bear in mind, our scene played every kind of music, from reggae to massively fast jazz dance, and mixed it all up. And in between, there's loads of stuff on mod. You know, the style was pretty mod. In fact, Galliano best described it when he said that the acid jazz scene is a mixture of mods and casuals. Mods from Eddie and casuals from Giles. And that's exactly how it was. Clothes-wise, Duffer of St George was the post-mod fashion brand. They redefined mod, making our clothes but with decent material for the first time. You know, because a lot of those 60s stuff that you could buy second hand was made of like nylon. So suddenly Duffer are using top fabrics to make clothes that we wanted to wear. And also what it did is it introduced, people don't realise, mods never wore training shoes until acid jazz. Even though if you look in pictures of the 60s, mods wore hockey boots, training shoes, whatever. But from the 79 revival, training shoes were something that soul boys and casuals wore, not mods. So all those things changed, and mod got redefined, you know, through the acid jazz spectrum, if you like, until Britpop came and just gave another impetus for another generation of young mods. So I'm really pleased that happened, because the mod scene, if it hadn't been shaken up like that, would have disappeared, I think.
In terms of the artists, that you've signed for acid jazz. How did that sit with you, with your sort of like mod and soul heritage, in terms of, like, for example, the Brand New Heavies or Jamiroquai? Did you specifically look for these types of people, or what was it about sort of your artists that attracted you to them?
Well, I'm a soul boy. I've always been a soul boy. I love soul music. I love black music. It used to be called black music. I don't think there's any soul in the current, what's called R&B now. I think that's a pretty soulless genre. The likes of Beyonce and stuff have rinsed any soul out of that kind of music. So I've always loved soul music, whatever its type. So when the Brand New Heavies came along, I would never forget the first time I saw the Brand New Heavies at the Wayne Club in, what, 86. They're like a mod band, but they're playing this James Brown stuff that we'd never heard on the mod scene. You know, we played James Brown, but it certainly weren't James Brown in 1971 or even 1968. It was James Brown from 1964. Very different kettle of fish. So suddenly, you've got these new people. The mod scene was getting smaller and smaller and more insular. You've got these new people with new bands, Barry Sharp, Diana Brown and the Brothers, the Young Disciples, the Brand New Heavies, A Man Called Adam. All these bands were mod influenced and mod related, but they weren't from the mod scene. So it was, even James Taylor Quartet, you know, it was so exciting, such a brilliant time. So obviously I was gravitating to that kind of music. That's when we split with Giles, because I think Giles didn't like the retro funk sound as much as I did, and I saw the future in the likes of the Brand New Heavies and Jamiroquai, and Giles didn't agree with me, which is, you know, it's fine, because he was always a bit more creative and a bit more progressive than I was musically. But then I regard myself as a populist, so I just want a lot of people to get into it, whereas I think Giles is quite happy with not a lot of people, just a small number of people, you know, on a Sunday at Dingwalls, and he was happy with that. I wanted the whole world to dance to Jamiroquai.
You clearly love music. What makes a record special for you?
If I knew that, I'd be Simon Cowell. What makes a record special for me? It's just, I don't know, I couldn't bottle it, you know. I mean, it's just something that you hear. Whether it's Curtis Mayfield, Gil Scott-Heron or Leroy Hudson, you know, there's something about a record that makes goosebumps, you know, and there's no telling what record it could be. I mean, for example, one of my favourite performances is Jennifer Hudson in Dreamgirls singing If I Was Telling You It Ain't Over. Every time I hear that record, I get goosebumps going up and down my arm. I don't really want to, but it's just so brilliant to me. So, you know, everything is taken on its own merits. I don't care if it's a prog, folk, hippie, reggae record. If I like it, I like it, and I don't really know why I like it.
Is there an artist or band that you would have liked to have signed for Acid Jazz?
Yeah, there's a few that I tried to sign. My musical hero, the producer that I've copied most, and I told him, in my career, is a guy called Leroy Hudson, who joined the Impressions when Curtis Mayfield left, but had an extraordinarily beautiful solo career, released 6 or 7 albums on Curtain Records, and I just loved his career. Now, I tried to sign him in the early 90s when Acid Jazz was massive, and he turned me down. I think the trouble with Americans is they didn't get what we were doing. I tried to sign Johnny Bristol. Johnny Bristol wanted me to hear, hey, here's this synth stuff. What he didn't realise is it was old. We didn't want old 80s stuff. We wanted old 60s and 70s stuff. They didn't get that. They thought their synth, hey, this is my synth stuff. They thought that was them on the cutting edge. Music had already moved forward 10 years since then. But when some English kid, 24-year-old, 26-year-old, phoned up and said, Johnny Bristol, a man who's had 1 million hits and has produced and written hundreds of hit records that are brilliant, can you just do it like you used to? Hey, why would I do that, you know? So they didn't get it. I tried to sign Brian Auger, who's another massive hero and influence on me, and I couldn't come to the right deal with him, which is a shame. And also Paul Weller. I almost signed Paul Weller. I've released a couple of tracks by Paul over the years, but when I was at London Records with Brand New Heavies and I had Jamiroquai and the James Taylor Quartet, I had a pretty good business plan for a label, and Paul was part of that business plan. He didn't have a deal at the time. And London Records didn't see it. They didn't think that Paul Weller had another album in him. And I'm like, you are joking, you know. And then, of course, he came out with the Paul Weller movement, and then he came out with Wildwood, which must have sold a few million copies. So I've often found that the major companies I've worked with aren't very good judges of music. That's why our industry's in trouble, because people go to Simon Cowell for the latest hit, whereas in fact the drip effect of anodyne pop music that is delivered by the likes of Simon Cowell, much as I admire his marketing genius, is ruining the creative input in our business. And where you used to be able to take refuge in what was coming out of Black America, I think that's in trouble as well. So I think the music scene itself is in a terrible state at the moment.
Do you think you could have made acid jazz work now, as opposed to 25 years ago? If you were starting now, would it be a far more difficult thing?
No, I'm a firm believer in social... the development of acid jazz was mirrored closely by the social development of the country at the time. You know, we were going through a bit of a boom and then a recession. In a recession, people always turn to what they love, which is music. So music traditionally does well in a recession. Now it won't, because there is no music to turn to, because the industry is completely different. Also, I think from a social perspective, we were enjoying the fruits of the first real black and white melding of cultures in the country, which came around in the late 70s. And I think by the mid to late 80s, it was as normal and natural to have black friends as it wasn't in the 60s and 70s, you know. And I think when black and white people got together in those social circumstances, with those social influences, the reggae, the soul, the jazz, which all different parts of the community brought to it, I think we had a golden period. I don't think you could do it now. I don't think the roots are there for people to understand where it came from, you know. And I think we're now a little bit more like America, where in America they don't really care about their musical, especially their black musical culture and history. I mean, they do now, but they didn't at the time. Sure. It was very disposable. Let's move forward to the next thing. Whereas over here, we've always been a nation of crate diggers that love it because it's good. And there's always been a strong soul tradition in this country, which I'm pleased to say is still there. I just hope the next generation of kids get into it as much as my generation did.
Do you feel that like movements have a part to play in musical culture as well? For example, you know, mods, punks, rockers, skinheads, you know, lots and lots of different types of groups, if you like, popular cultural groups. Do you think that with the lack of those today, that has an impact?
I wrote a TV series about the cultural impact, which was on ITV about 12 years ago, about the cultural impact of youth culture and their relationship with black music in particular. Although there are youth cultures in this country, or there were youth cultures that didn't have a relationship with black music, like goths and like punks. Although punks that's arguable because of reggae. Sure. However, I do believe they're very important, and I'm almost horrified. I think youth culture, if we're being sociological about this, I think youth culture is a brilliant way for the young adult to take their first steps into what is a kind of a difficult environment, leaving the family, making their own decisions on their own. But it's easier to do it with a group of like-minded friends that like the same stuff, yeah? So we've all been there, we can all see it, you know. There's 30 skinheads walking down the road. It's easier being one of those 30 skinheads than it is being one skinhead, you know. And I think that whole peer support network that comes with youth culture is not there anymore. Now I see it in my town, and it's the same in any little town in England, medium-sized town, lots of poverty. You see it in the libraries on a Saturday with the kids playing their gaming cards. You know, there's 25 of them sitting around a big table. God knows what they do, some kind of Dungeons and Dragons, weird shit. But even so, there's a little community support group for them. The only youth cultures I see now, in the tradition that we understand, are goths. Or emos, or whatever they call themselves. I don't really understand why. I mean, there's young mods out there, of course there is. There's young skinheads out there, and even now, recently, there's young teddy boys out there, and rockabillys. That's great, but it's no longer a mass movement. Whereas in 1979 and 1981, Secret Affair, Time for Action, sold 380,000 copies. You know, I mean, that's a single. How many mods were there in the country at that time? Must have been millions, as the Purple Hearts once said. So,
yeah.
You know, but it's the raging of an old man against the dying of the light, I'm afraid, because whatever I say has got no relevance to contemporary society. I'm talking in a historical perspective, talking about my time in 1979 to 1981. But, you know.
How would you describe your own personal fashion style? Is there a certain style that Eddie Pillett always goes for, and how would you describe that?
It's casual. I like desert boots, I like Levi's. I've a big collection of Big E Levi's. I'm a massive fan of Levi's. I wear golf blouses, which normal people call Harringtons. And I like knitwear. Knitwear is my kind of chosen. I love half jumpers. I think you call them tank tops. I find that name embarrassing. It reminds me of my nan in the 70s knitting awful stuff. But I like half jumpers.
Is there a certain sort of garment that Eddie Pillett always reaches for? Is, you know, that kind of every day or pretty much every day you kind of really like wearing this?
Polo shirt.
Yeah.
It's nice. It's smart. It's casual. You've only got 3 buttons. It's nice and tight. Looks good.
And are you inspired by anyone in terms of fashion?
Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen is the fashion icon of the generation before mine. I think he's fantastic. I think in my youth it was Paul Weller. There's no doubt about Paul Weller had a certain je ne sais quoi, still has to a degree, although I draw the line at those flares. I have done the flares thing myself, but yeah, you know, I just like nice clothes that make me feel comfortable. I've got suits. In fact, I'm just going through a tartan trousered phase. I've got a nice little tailor, and he knocks me up whatever tartan trousers I fancy. They're not that expensive when you consider a pair of jeans is going to cost you 120 quid. You can buy tailored trousers for 80 quid. Thank you very much. Covered buttons. So I've started getting a few Ruperts made, which I like, and also up until quite recently I had a collection of vintage pearl button shirts. I like the pearl press stud Western style shirts, mainly made by Lee, but sometimes by Wrangler. Yeah, in window pane check, always, or stripes, bold. Was that pretentious? Sorry about that. I like my clothes, you know what I mean?
I mean, Steve McQueen is the quintessential cool guy.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else that you kind of would put into the cool guy category, or in your opinion, what defines cool?
Again, like I said about what defines a hit record, if I knew, what defines a record that I like, if I knew, you know, I'll bottle it and make a load of money. I think it's just cool, you know. If someone's cool, they're cool. Weller's cool, you know. So, there are classic staples, and I think what makes Britain good, and what actually I like about David Watts, is that we do the heritage thing really well. The designers know what people like me want to wear, so they make variations on a theme. See, with those brands, those heritage brands like David Watts, you don't get all the flim-flam stuff. You get what people want to wear. Whereas with a lot of the bigger brands, they make stuff because it's clever, you know, and it's not necessarily what you want to wear. So that's what we do so well in this country. You know, I could wear all of your range, whereas I could only wear 2 things from Dior. Yes. Ever.
Are there any favourites in the David Watts range when you look through?
Yeah, I like the knitwear, as I said. I mean, you know, you do a very lightweight, I think it's merino wool probably, shirt, which is a bit in the style of an old-fashioned Italian kind of, like this, but much finer. Yes. That's really nice. And also, I never thought people had managed to do a better polo shirt, but I really like the David Watts polo shirt. I've had a few comments about that, which is not what I was expecting, because a polo shirt's a polo shirt. I thought they all look the same, but obviously they don't, you know.
And in that case then, that's a wrap.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming to London.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed.